Hey, how you doing? You know, if you look up a gyroscopic precession online, you can try it. You get a nice little description, and there's a simplex little formula for gyroscopic precession. But you won't get an explanation from anybody. My entire life I've been trying to simplify things because all of nature fundamentally is very simple. And it really is. Here's a neat little shell, and you look at it from this direction, you look at it from this direction. It actually follows a Fibonacci sequence, the same as this nautilus shell cross-section. And this is the curvature of growth over the nexus of counter space. So we can say counter space, we can say subspace, we can say zero-point energy. Try to explain gyroscopic precession. Smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. I've said that a million times, and it's true. It's the reason why super high energy light has a super tiny footprint, and low energy light, like red end spectrum light or infrared, is enormous. And to answer that, it's incredibly simple. Tying everything together in absolute simplicity. Now, gyroscopic precession is the same precession that you actually see that forms that hypertrochoid pattern underneath the supercell, i.e. the torus of the magnetic field. It's very simple. Then we have to ask ourselves the question, now this is a low friction gyroscope. It's not super low friction, but it's actually a high-end gyroscope. Just ask anybody with a PhD. Say, excuse me, sir, could you explain gyroscopic precession? They'll give you a Wikipedia answer. That's not the answer for the reason why a gyroscope precesses. We'll give you the formula for it. So what gyroscopic precession is 90-degree torque relative to the spin of the mass. That's a nice description there, Mr. Professor, but you didn't actually explain gyroscopic precession. You actually see this point actually extrapolates out of torus. That's the force vector. The reason why there's gyroscopic precession relative to this mass, this brass flywheel, is very simple. I don't need a formula. You can look at it like Mother Nature does. Well, what's the explanation there, Mr. Professor, Mr. Tattooed Monkey? Well, the answer is very simple. It's called ether torque. Everything is always tied to something else, always fighting something else. I'm going to simplify things. You ever notice that of the 1,000 or so videos I have of the supercell, where you actually see the torus-like beautiful formation, which you can see right here. Everybody's interested in that hypertrochoid or spirograph pattern around this black central hole there. And that, of course, would be the vortex towards counter space, or zero-point energy, or towards the place where no magnetism exists, because at the center of the antispatial vector of gravity, there is no gravity. Center of a magnetic field, there is no magnetism. Everybody's fascinated by the beautiful light show out here, but nobody's interested in that black spot in the center. That's where everything occurs from. Everything comes from there, and everything returns to there. You ask yourself the question. I got an email today from a German guy, and he says he seemed to have found a lot of proof that what I said, that super high energy light is the basis for hydrogen, which of course it is. And something he left out is, there's countless real world pictures of it, is at the center of these black holes, and of course the black hole is not actually a hole, it's a supermass with no magnitude. It's emitting out trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen. And it's occurring at the central nexus point right here. If you look at the gyroscope end on that's precessing, where nothing is, you have this little escape portal where trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen are being emitted. And hydrogen, of course, is just super energy light. That's all it is. You know, when you actually see this universe for what it is and how it is, you see everything is either centripetal convergence or centrifugal divergence. Everything is either force and motion, inertia and acceleration. This whole world looks like a show. And the more you see it to be a show, the less enthralled you are with it. The more you actually step back and you see it like a piece of theater. A lot of people want to get up on stage and be a part of the drama. There's a reason why wisdom-seeking recluses, they were a recluse by definition, were forest dwellers. They called them forest-dwelling recluses. They had come into town to get some food, and then immediately go back out of town again. They weren't interested in the drama on stage. Unfortunately, it's the case that most people are interested in that. It's all a show. I want to put everything into absolute simplicity here, and I've got the best books ever written on this subject. And I always look at them not for information. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. I use them as springboards of error. I'll see, some deep-seated, highly intellectual, but wisdom-bereft error, and I'll take a springboard back from it. Here's a couple great books on the subject, because they start out with the countless errors of the most intelligent and partially wise minds of our time. This one's called On Original Sin, a disputation with Leo concerning the advent of Christ. This is from the Theological Treatise, and it's really good. Source book. It's called, this is from Odo of Tournai. There's this book, and there's another one. This is a library reject. I love these great rare books that are always library rejects. They're rejects because nobody's interested in delving into the deep stuff. It's called Gods and the One God by Grant. Here's a couple great books. I use these as springboards, not just these two books, but countless other books. You'll look at the error, and you'll recognize the error for what they are, and actually, oh, it's that spine. I wonder what that crackling noise was. It's actually the spine of the barcode of that ex-library book. I'm going to talk about the heart of liberation, also to light and illumination. We were talking about this last night in live stream, and the stuff that I actually take for granted fascinates a lot of people because they've never, geared their mind to think about that way in terms of light and illumination. This idea of Abrahamic religions, and all creationistic religions are Abrahamic, they all start out with this premise of original sin, or prima causa, or first cause. When you actually posit something that's just absolutely absurd, then you actually have to back it up with more absurdities, usually that are way deeper. There is no first cause or original sin in emanationistic metaphysics. Well, what's emanationism? The Greek word for it is called prohodos. Prohodos kind of means going forth. Basically it just means emanation, which is where we get the word emanation from. Emanationism is at the heart of Advaita Vedanta, the Upanishads, original, and I do stress original, so-called Buddhism. The term in the earliest sense was called Brahmayana, Path of the Absolute. All the teachings of Albanus, Pythagoras, Plotinus, Numenius, Syrianus, Iamblichus, Proclus, on and on, all of that is emanationistic metaphysics. And it's something completely different than the two antinomies that everybody on this earth thinks of today. They think, well, you're either an atheist, which is a materialist, or you're a creationist. There's just those two things. You just think that all beauty and life in nature is just a cosmic happenstance, like 1,000 monkeys, pounding on 1,000 typewriters at the same time, and, given 1 billion years of 1,000 monkeys pounding on 1,000 typewriters, you will, at some point in time, come up with a 11-volume set of Shakespearean literature. And that's actually what it posits. It's just happenstance that beauty came to manifest. That's just anything that's more ridiculous than an old guy sitting on a throne with a beard up in the clouds. Sky Daddy, as I humorously like to say. They'll actually point out the splinter in your eye when they've got a giant log in their eye. So the materialists, you should always point that out to them when you encounter an atheist. An atheist has nothing to do with God, by the way. It has to do with the denial of metaphysical substrates. Like, you're positing something infinitely more ludicrous than all Abrahamic religions, is that you actually believe that 1,000 monkeys pounding on 1,000 typewriters, given enough time, will produce something super beautiful and divine. 11-volume set of Shakespeare, for example, not specifically Shakespeare, but some multi-volume work of extravagant beauty, something that's so beautiful it'll make you cry. I mean, we know that's just completely impossible. So we have to reject either one of these two, which of course are antinomies. It's like talking about the polarity on a magnet. A magnet technically doesn't have poles. Sure it does. No, it doesn't, but that's a matter for another discussion. I'm interested in what sits between those two. What's the opposite of both absurdities? This would be the plane of inertia of rationality, logic, reason, and divine simplicity. Instead of saying light and illumination, which of course is principle and attribute, What if we said of illumination, instead of saying illumination, we said the light in disturbance? The light in disturbance is what people say and mean when they say illumination or light specific. When they say light, they mean illumination. When they say illumination, they don't know what they're saying. So what's illumination? Well, illumination is light. No, illumination is a divergence of light. It's under disturbance. Light under disturbance means illumination. This means that it has a frequency or a wavelength. But instead of even saying frequency or wavelength, we're talking about a disturbance of something. Well, why is it disturbed? Because there is nothing, and think about this, by the way, pause the video if you want. There's nothing that you could think of in this universe or in another galaxy far, far away, real or unreal, that doesn't have at least, at the very least, one attribute. By the way, in talking about the circuit of light, I know you have a hard time picturing it, but light itself is a blinking toroidal manifestation. And the reason for this is ether resistance. Now, Nikola Tesla referred to this as the ratio between elasticity and density. The thing that we call the speed of sound is the ratio of elasticity and density of air, nitrogen and oxygen. The thing that we call c, or the speed of light, which is not a speed at all, is the ratio of elasticity to density. This is the hysteresis of the medium. The hysteresis of the medium is no more fancy than saying, like, say you got some really thick honey. Like, how fast can you stir your finger into some cold honey? Cold honey, not hot honey. Very viscous. There's only a you could, even if you're Superman, there's only so fast you could stir and disturb the honey. That's the ratio between its elasticity and density of that viscous fluid, honey, for example. What's the rate at which you could disturb it? Closer to the rest nexus, the higher the capacitance. This is also too inverse into how humans think. We get a bigger box, it'll hold more stuff. Smaller box will hold fewer of that stuff. But when it comes to capacitance, the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. Light is nothing but a blinking string of toroidal pearls. Now, there's no matter making up light until it reaches maximum capacitance, in which case you have a circular frequency that I've humorously called hard light. That's where we have hydrogen. All future endeavors, and I've already been proven right on this a couple of years ago, even though I've been talking about it for many, many years, is that super high capacitance light and constructive interference will actually produce matter. This reconciles light and matter. I've explained magnetism, I've reconciled light and matter. I've told you what a black hole is. Of course, it's not a hole, it's a supermass with no magnitude. The only reason anything actually has any spatial footprint. Now, of course, the region of influence, of course, is still there, but there's nothing there. The reason why there's nothing there is that the only thing that keeps any matter in the visible universe is magnetism. That's the volume of every atom, and it's called its interatomic diameter or radius. Measured in picometers in the case of an atom, or in the case of matter, that's the only thing that keeps it in the visible universe. When dielectricity overthrows it, then it blinks out of existential existence, i.e. empirical, demonstrable existence of magnitude. So light's a blinking string of toroidal pearls. I'm getting here to liberation very, very quickly, because all of this is interconnected. If you understand light and illumination, as I've said many times, if you understand the two lights and the two darknesses, you can understand everything in the universe. The lower the capacitance, the longer the time pulse is to generate the torque. Let's just take low energy light like infrared, for example. The lower the capacitance, and red energy light or infrared is very low capacitance. The lower the capacitance, the longer the time pulse is to generate the torque tension for this blinking string of toroidal pearls. They blink in and out of existence. When you connect all of those, you have a frequency. How many cycles per second exist depends on the capacitance. The more there is, the higher the capacitance. Also, too, red energy light, for example, is endless, countless thousands of times larger than super high energy X-ray or gamma light. It's like, if it's more powerful, it should be larger. No, it's inverse. In the case of fields, the smaller the space, the higher the capacitance. This is relative to infrared and gamma and beyond. And when you understand how fields work, you understand this, because greatest energy is rest energy. So the higher capacitance is equal to greater energy, which is undeniable by anybody, then it must have a very, very, very tiny spatial footprint. And this, of course, is the case. When there's no footprint at all, and you have a supermass where dielectricity overthrows magnetism's ability to keep it in the visible universe, we have this neat little phenomenon called black hole. It's not a hole. The region of influence is still there, but there's no mass there. Not that's visible. A region of influence exists, so you have something super, super massive in the case of actual mass, i.e. matter. But there's nothing there to observe. It's just an empty hole. Kind of like, remember when I made the prediction that when we had genuine high-resolution imagery of a black hole, it would look exactly like the superstellar? Remember when I said that years and years ago? And it was proven to be 100% right. I didn't have access to any super, super mega billion-dollar telescope, but I told you that's what it would look like. And, well, lo and behold, that's exactly what it looks like. So the tattooed monkey, it might actually know a thing or two. Frequency and wavelength are illumination. This is the extrinsic side of light. Light is principle, illumination is attribute. These are not two things. There's two digits to the first two digits of the Fibonacci sequence are 1 and 1. The second one is not a different one or another one. It's the attribute of the one. Light and illumination, principle and attribute. The Greeks called this the iristos dias. To say indefinite dyad is incorrect. The indefinite dyad is not two. It's the extrinsic attribute of the first one. Principle and attribute, light and illumination, not two different things in an inseparable one. If you understand this fully, then you understand the very crux of emanationism. Emanationism might sound like a fancy word, but it's the very basis and foundation of all Advaita Vedanta, Upanishads, Plotinus, Numenius, Syrianus, Pythagoras, original Buddhism. Those are all monism. And metaphysical monism is a total and absolute opposite of both atheism, which is just materialism, and creationism over here. Abrahamic religions, creationism. Now here we have atheism and materialism, which is technically called metaphysical atheism. The total opposite of both of those things. Most people think there are only those two things. Well, the opposite of both of those is emanationism. That's not my opinion, that's a feeling. I mean, not my opinion or feeling, that's a fact. Getting into liberation and the theurgy thereof. All embodiment, just like this puppet show, we see it for what it is. The two most important passages, which are timeless, and they're applied to different metaphysics, but they saying the same thing, Bhav Nirodha Nabandham, and the other one is Yoga Chit Vritti Nirodha. Vritti means disturbance or perturbation. Bhava means becoming, but it also too means a modulation. We're talking about modulation of spirit. Modulation of spirit, or nous, or spiritus sanctum, or chitta, or jet. I don't care what language you use. It's a reference to the modulation, the extrinsic attribute, which is primordial. By the way, and I have this, and I uploaded it last night to a Substack. You can listen to the audio for further depth on this. Avidya and agnosis. These are Greek, Pali, and Sanskrit terms. Avidya, agnosis, Greek, Sanskrit, Pali. And vidya and gnosis. You just stick an a privative before those two words, gnosis and vidya, which in any translation will be light, but they also too mean wisdom. Wisdom, of course, is self-proximity. It's a reference to rest. You stick an a before it, then you have the opposite of, the inverse to. The opposite and the inverse to vidya and gnosis means a modulation of gnosis, a modulation of vidya. Spiritual modulation, in other words. Now this is conventionally called ignorance, but it doesn't actually mean ignorance. There is no English word for this. It's a reference of the spirit under modulation, avidya, agnosis. Well, if that's embodiment, avidya and agnosis, then vidya and gnosis must be transcendence. That's correct. This is the exact same distinction between light and illumination. Embodiment, which is due to avidya, but that's not a cause, that's attributional. We can't blame illumination on light, and we can't blame light for illumination. The thing that we call light is the light under modulation. Like I said, instead of calling illumination, we should call it light under disturbance, which is no different than saying frequency or wavelength. The same is true of the spirit. The reason why there is embodiment is due to that primordial, which is not first cause, not original sin. This idea of original sin is Abrahamic. It's not found in emanationism proper, because it doesn't exist there. Demodulation, which I know is not technically a word. Modulation, of course, is frequency, is wavelength. Of spirit, demodulation, therefore, too, is rest. Rest is liberation. Rest is the goal and end fruit of theurgy. It's the highest potential one could attain to. Depotentialization, i.e. pure potential, i.e. rest, which was definitionally, instead of saying liberation, we should just call it what it actually is, which is fulfillment. Spiritual fulfillment is transcendence. That depotentialization in manifesting an embodiment is unrest. Its modulation is spirit, which, like this fire, must always be fed. Force, emotion, attachments, fears, anxieties, stresses. Humans today are not sane because, unfortunately, we live in a hailstorm of frequencies, of countless wavelengths. We're bombarded by EMF from repeater stations, radio, satellite, on and on and on. You should go to the deep woods, and I have a cabin in the deep woods, where you don't even have cell phone service there. They're still bombarded from outer space, however, and radio stations, and Elon Musk's satellite network, which, unless you're inside of a cave, it's permeating everything. Of course, my cabin has a metal roof on it that's grounded, so I am greatly isolated. Thankfully, my metal roof is grounded, so I'm actually attenuated at a lot of the frequencies that cause human insanity. And I see it everywhere now. If every human being could see the upteen million frequencies that they're bombarded with every microsecond, it would scare the living daylights out of you. I know what it is. I don't have to visually see it, but I know what it is. If you're ever able to step into a grounded Faraday cage and feel what that feels like, just for like 10 minutes, it'd scare you. You're so used to the noise, like a person that lives underneath a overhead subway in Chicago, going out into the countryside. They can't stand the quiet. It takes them a month or two to get over how quiet and at peace their soul is. People are fascinated by the torus, but not the hole in the middle, as in the case of the supercell over there. Well, the torus springs from that hole. Everything comes from it, and everything returns to it. That is the rest nexus. This is a neat little visual of the rest nexus that Mother Nature is showing you. That's the end goal of liberation. This is wisdom itself, is centripetal return. Magnitude and the footprint of frequency and wavelength, i.e. disturbance of spirit, is the reason why there is embodiment and suffering and the drama of life that everybody is obviously attached to. There's an article that I have permission to post by his son, Ramapi Kumaraswamy, who is my friend. He's a cardiac surgeon. He's now since dead. Of his father, Dr. Anandakitish Kumaraswamy. It's a great article to download and read on my Substack. It's called Ka, in other words, denotating zero in Indian metaphysics. Once you actually have aloof realization of this show, this drama, this theater that we're all living in, the more you want to retract from it. This doesn't mean you want to be some sort of, loincloth wearing, rabid recluse living in a cave. Some of them people end up like that, but there's a few YouTubers that people keep asking me about, and I find it amazing. They're attached to the drama. It's like somebody that complains about the smell of the brown stuff. I'm not going to use the words. It's like, but this person has got their head sticking in the toilet bowl forever. It's like, you don't like the smell and whatnot of that dirty brown stuff. Why don't you pull your head out of the porcelain throne there in the bathroom? I mean, the guy does. There's several people like this. They just love and they're attached to the drama. Life is too short for that. I'm not interested in dissecting garbage. You know, this is garbage, I can't stand garbage, but I can't stay away from it. I love being, waist deep in it all the time and pointing out how much I can't stand it. Why don't you climb out of the garbage? You keep talking about it being garbage. Get out of it. Life is too short for that. I had to talk about that because there's a few YouTubers that people ask me about. It's like, these people do nothing but complain about the garbage, and yet they're always waist deep in it. Leave it alone. Most people are attached to the drama of this life, unfortunately. Humanity's in a dire state right now, and it seems like it's getting worse. I hope it actually settles down. Everything runs in cycles. I'm certainly the furthest thing from a doom and gloomer. I am absolutely not. If you understand what illumination truly is, and understand what the uncaused cause of embodiment is, then you can figure out theurgy very, very simply. Demodulation, extraction from the false identity of the things that you think you are. It's like the ignorant signal being so embodied and passing through the radio thinks it is the broadcast out of the speaker. Broadcast out of the speaker is not what the signal is. That signal that comes out of the speaker is the interpretation by the radio of the signal. The signal is everywhere and nowhere. People say, what happens when we die? And what happens to the signal when you smash the radio? The radio is one thing. The broadcast from the speaker is another. The signal is something entirely different. Tattvamasi is just a fancy way of saying, you are the signal. You're not the radio. You're not the broadcast, which is the existential consciousness of the interpretation of the signal by the radio, because the broadcast that comes out of the speaker that we listen to and enjoy is the consubstantiality of two things, the signal and the interpretation of the signal by the radio. But I'll point out to you that signal has a frequency, and when I say frequency, I'm talking about a modulation of, a disturbance of. That's how any radio tunes the signal, is that the signal is energy not at rest. And saying it's not at rest is saying it's under disturbance. That's the frequency and wavelength, i.e. the modulation, the blinking and reblinking toroidal footprint of the signal, which is no different than saying energy, under modulation. That's how any radio tunes it in, is that it has a frequency footprint, a modulation that the radio tunes into. Imagine if the signal were to demodulate, erase all frequency. It would be the signal at rest. A signal at rest with no frequency and no wavelength is no different than saying rest energy. And that rest energy cannot be tuned by any radio. And then the link between the signal and the radio are forever broken. And that is a very, very, very down-to-earth explanation of liberation and theurgy itself. I hope you like these videos. If you ever want to contact me, my information is the link below. Check out my Substack. Any donation is always warmly welcome. Lux e Veritas to you.